Hello viewers, welcome. This is Disease Reversal and Mitigation Studio. I'm your host Fred Mushiri, a health teacher and practitioner based in Kenya. We have a very important topic to discuss on the forgotten disease. Now, if you have any comment or question, let me know in the comment section. And if you have a direct consultation to make, kindly contact me on the number provided on your screen and I'll be willing to respond to you. Otherwise, continue to like, share, and subscribe to enhance visibility of these topics as they become available live on this YouTube channel. Now, let's embark on this very important topic on the forgotten disease. And I know you're wondering, which is this forgotten disease? It's called leprosy. It's a fungal disease. And how is it forgotten? Because science never makes emphasis on it. There's no sensitization about fungal illnesses or about leprous diseases. And the other thing, even the ministers of the gospel do not discuss this condition. Now, let's see what divine intelligence has to say concerning leprous or fungal infections. In one case, when a house is found to have a mold or a fungal infection, the priest is supposed to come and inspect the house. And in case they discover it has greenish and reddish streaks, then he is supposed to quarantine that house. It is supposed to be emptied and closed for 7 days. Later, the priest will come and re-inspect, and if the mold is found to be spreading, then remediation or correction is supposed to be done, where the stones are supposed to be removed, the wall is scraped, and then replastered. And if the mold still continues, the priest now declares the house unfit for human habitation and is supposed to be demolished and the materials cast away from outside the camp of Israel. So this is how seriously fungal infestation was taken those days. And I wonder why we do not have a lot of emphasis today. Now, in the book written by Dr. Harvey Kellogg in 1899, he compares leprosy in the Jewish law to fungoid or molds in the house. And he says these were common in those climates because it was warm. So the so-called description of leprosy in the house is what we call mold or fungus today. Now, reading from the same book, we are told that the green spots on the wall or the musty odor and the damp, germ-laden air to be found in many palatial residences, as well as spare beds and dark parlors, is also found among people of more limited means. So this is an infestation that does not discriminate between whether you live in the palace or in the slums. It will be found even in those spare bedrooms which are prescribed for visitors. And because seldom do people do aeration and sunbathing of the clothes in the spare bedroom, now it becomes a source of infection and also respiratory conditions among visitors who come to live in those houses. So let's take it seriously. If a building could be demolished, a very costly building could be demolished because of a fungal infestation, then how much more seriously should we take this condition today if we care about sanitation? Now, it is not only houses that were demolished. We also had human quarantine. And Miriam was an example of those people who had been quarantined for 7 days. They were isolated from the camp because they had a fungal infection or a leprous condition. Now, the Bible talks of fungal plagues, and God may have used a fungal plague as a tool of vengeance, okay? As an instrument of retribution. If you read from Deuteronomy 28 verse 22, we are told, the Lord shall smite thee with a consumption, and then later with a blasting, and with mildew, and they shall pursue thee until thou perish. The word here used for consumption today is tuberculosis. So tuberculosis has always been a leprous disease or a fungal infection. It is only the mainstream science want to mask leprosy by attributing tuberculosis to other causes, those are bacteria, and then describing it in a manner that it needs a modern day approach to its treatment as opposed to what was being done in the past concerning sanitation. Then you can read the same in Amos 4 verse 9 and Haggai 2 verse 17 that God used blasting and mildew as a plague. And it is not that God caused or brought the fungal infection, but people were creating conducive conditions for fungal growth in their, and that is why the plague was coming. You've ever heard of plagues among the children of Israel? Is after they were eating or after they had eaten meat. So there is something to do with biological tissue or dead biological tissue and growth of fungus or leprous diseases. Even today, as we discover later, there are so many fungal infections associated with eating meat that is dead. By the way, there's no meat that is living. If you have to eat meat, the animal has to be dead. Now, let's consider the plagues of Egypt. They all had to do with dead biological tissue. So whether it was the plague of the blood, the frogs, the gnats, the flies, the livestock, the boils, which were noisome ulcers, these were dead biological tissue, apart from one plague of darkness. All the rest of the plagues resulted in dead biological tissue. And this is where fungus grows, because fungus comes by default with the absence of life. So it prefers dead and decaying tissue. Now, in one of the plagues of darkness, there was no death outrightly, but darkness also creates a conducive environment for fungal growth. How? Because during times of darkness, especially for the 3 days there was darkness, there was no sun. And one natural remedy for fungus is sunbathing. There was no sun for 3 days. And if there's no sun, there is wetness. So fungus also loves wetness. So there was darkness, there was wetness, there was no sun. That could have predisposed the environment to fungal growth, and this could have resulted to fungal infections, which are mostly airborne because they are inhaled. So fungus is the most likely cause in diseases that are said to be zoonotic. Zoonotic simply means they are spreading from animals to humans. Man should have interacted with diseased or dead animals to have a zoonotic disease. We rarely hear of epidemics between healthy animals and humans. By the way, humans have been domesticating animals, but whenever they consume meat from animals that are diseased and dead, by the way, you never eat meat unless it is dead, then that is how we contract zoonotic diseases. Now, in future, we are going to have what we call a fungal apocalypse. That is a curse that may spread into the entire world, that may claim so many lives because of people's rebellion. Now, from the book PH 026 1.3, it says that the Lord's curse is upon the earth, upon man, upon beasts, upon the fish of the sea. And as transgression becomes almost universal, the curse will be permitted to become as broad and as deep as the transgression. So, what is this curse God is going to use that is going to be widespread to cover the entire planet, in the air, on dry surface, and affecting aquatic life? You'll be surprised to realize it has to do with consumption of dead carcasses or meat. So we are told, if you continue, disease is contracted by the use of meat, and the diseased flesh of these dead carcasses is sold in the marketplaces, and disease among men is the sure result. So you wonder how the Lord is going to make a curse to spread across the whole earth. It's by consumption of meat. And meat can only be consumed after it is dead. And dead meat attracts fungus or a leprous disease. Now, let's get into the claims of mainstream science. Did you ever hear of the world's deepest medical cover-up? Is the cover-up of the leprosy disease. Now, today, leprosy has been hidden in the name or disguised as Hansen's disease, okay, according to the discoverer. But it's one of the humanity's oldest recorded diseases. It has been hidden or covered up in this manner. The name of the disease has been changed from leprosy to Hansen's. And number two, the causative agent has been changed. So it's no longer attributed to eating of dead meat. It's no longer attributed to poor sanitation, bad aeration in those spare bedrooms, but now they're attributing it to a bacteria called Mycobacterium leprae. This is science, but we come to confirm whether this is true. Is leprosy being caused by Mycobacterium leprae? Is it a bacteria? So please note, even as they claim it's a bacteria, the genus name of this bacteria is myco, and myco simply means fungus. So the disease is of fungal origin. They know that, but they want to deny. So it was historically misunderstood, leading to severe social stigma, fear, and forced isolation in leper colonies. So mainstream science is saying that this disease was historically misunderstood. So in other words, they're saying God misled Moses by outlining the health laws that were to be observed in case there was an infestation of fungus, either in the house or in any person. Now, those persons were supposed to be isolated. So science is saying that there was no need to do that. Now, you're going to judge for yourself who is more intelligent about diseases. Is it God or science? Now, science also claims that this disease is curable. How is it curable? They say since the inception of antibiotics in 1940, this disease became treatable and less contagious. Is it true? Does it mean that the knowledge and the wisdom of science is overriding what God has revealed to us? I don't believe. So science initially said that this disease had a cure in 1940 by use of antibiotics such as sulfone drugs. Okay, let's hear. Later, in 1980, they introduced what we call the multi-drug therapy. So does it mean what they had claimed was treating leprosy in 1940 is no longer working? You know, the challenge or the problem you are going to have with mainstream science is guidelines are always revised, information is always revised, but what has not been revised is used as gospel truth, and it can even lead to persecution if you deny it. But that is the same information that will be revised a few years to come. So in 1990, they say they have to introduce a combined therapy. So they have to treat with many drugs. And the drugs that were used to treat leprosy are the same drugs used to treat tuberculosis. So they acknowledge tacitly that whatever causes tuberculosis, which is fungal in origin, also causes leprosy, which is also fungal. So the two diseases have a similar cause. Now, let's talk about the guy who is said to have discovered leprosy. In 1873, this Norwegian physician, Gerhard Amau Hansen, is said to have discovered Mycobacterium leprae, which is a bacterium that is said to cause leprosy. And the disease was changed from leprosy to Hansen's disease. Now, you would think that because he discovered that it is mycobacterium that causes leprosy, then as usual, as it is expected, scientists are always rewarded by the Nobel Prize Committee because of these discoveries. Is this Norwegian physician going to be rewarded? Let's see. Now, his Nobel Peace Prize is denied. So we are told, while his breakthrough revolutionized leprosy treatment, he did not win the Nobel Prize. For 3 times he was nominated, but he did not win the Nobel Peace Prize for medicine. And his failure to win was because he did not isolate. In other words, he did not capture the bacteria. So this means he did not discover the Mycobacterium leprae. And we have this information being spread abroad today that the causative agent for leprosy is Mycobacterium leprae. Yet, the person who discovered it, or the so-called discoverer, did not capture that bacteria. So we need to be surprised by some of the information we are consuming from mainstream medical books. So then we have to unveil the mask. We have to unveil the mask in that by asking, why do we have this disease being masked? Why is it that there is no sensitization about leprosy? Why is it there is no emphasis of this disease, which was so common in the Bible times? So despite the numerous cases of leprous diseases we have today we still have fungal infections, and there are many, but they are not called leprosy. So despite the many cases of leprous diseases, why has this disease been masked by other names? And why is the cause of this disease issues to do with sanitation, consumption of dead meat? Why are they not being emphasized? And I'll tell you the reason. The main reason why leprosy is not emphasized, it is not called by its name, it is because it is a symbol of sin. And this is what we read in Desire of Ages, page 262.1. That deep-rooted, eradicable, deadly, it was looked upon as a symbol of sin. By the ritual law, the leper was pronounced unclean. In the same way, we look at sin, the best description for sin is leprosy, because sin is deep-rooted, it is difficult to eradicate apart from a divine intervention. It is also deadly, and therefore it perfectly symbolizes sin. And in the same way, a person who had been healed of leprosy was pronounced to be clean. Somebody who has been forgiven of their sins are said to be clean. So like one already dead, he was shut out from the habitations of men. Whatever he touched was unclean, and the air was polluted by his breath. So in the same way, sinners will be shut out of the camp of God's people on the judgment day. This is the way those with leprosy were shut out. And this should have been a constant reminder that eventually those who engage in sin will also be shut out of the camp of God's people. That is the eternal Jerusalem. So Satan may not be happy to be exposed, and Satan may not be happy for people to have this constant reminder that the way people with leprosy are isolated is the way sinners will be isolated, is the way the devil himself will be isolated from God's tabernacle on the judgment day. So leprosy is a symbol of sin. and the devil does not want to be unmasked. And that is why leprosy has been given other names, and the disease is rarely mentioned today. Now, the only disease that personifies the devil today is leprosy. So we are told from the book Signs and Times, March 14, that he saw that the heart was leprous with sin. He caused the plague of the heart to be revealed in the dreadful judgment of physical leprosy. So as leprosy was the sure death he permitted to take the natural course, so the leprosy of sin would destroy the soul unless the sinner received the healing of the grace of God. So, have you ever imagined of a disease you could liken to sin? It's leprosy. So the sure result of those who had been infected with leprosy was death. So the sure result of those who are indulging in sin will be death. So the devil will not want to hear that there is a disease that keeps reminding people to avoid sin. And that is why the disease is rarely mentioned. Jesus also said or used this disease as a symbol of bigotry among the Pharisees and also their rejection of light. If you read Desire of Ages 271.1, we are told physical disease, however malignant and deep-seated, was healed by the power of Christ. But the disease of the soul took a firmer hold upon those who closed their eyes against the light. Leprosy and palsy were not so terrible as bigotry and unbelief. So, you ever imagine of something you could liken to the bigotry? That is the entrenched belief the Pharisees had to the extent they could not accept the Son of God because of their entrenched beliefs in the law of Moses, that even masked them from seeing the light, who was Jesus Christ. So that is called bigotry and unbelief. The fact that they rejected the light is likened to a leprous disease. And you see, one of the natural remedies of a fungal or leprous disease is the sun. But if you reject the sun or the light, you cannot get healed. So if you have a disease that characterizes that rejection, then it's leprosy. Because the same way, leprosy will not be healed if you do not sunbathe and if you do not expose yourself to light. The same way, you're not going to be healed from sin if you do not accept the light, which is Jesus Christ. So we are told in the Desire of Ages 262 that the disease is incurable. So of all the diseases known in the East, leprosy was the most dreaded. So in the same way leprosy was dreaded, in the same way we are supposed to dread sin. It is incurable and contagious. It was incurable and contagious in character. And its horrible effect upon its victims filled the bravest with fear. So sin will cause the destruction of even the brave. And so is the leprous disease. You've read about Naaman the general, okay? So there's a disease that does not spare, even the generals in the army. So it will cause their death. So the same way sin will cause the death of even the strongest in the community, like Samson. So if there's a disease to describe sin and Satan perfectly, then it is leprous disease. So this disease cannot be cured. And this is the truth. So when science claims to have found the cure in 1940, definitely they were talking of antibiotics, but antibiotics cannot cure leprosy. Whatever cures leprosy has to come with, has to do with natural laws that God has prescribed himself. For example, the sun is a natural remedy for leprosy. Use of salt, use of good nutrition, proper aeration, okay? But if you suggest antibiotics where proper sanitation and proper hygiene is needed, then those antibiotics cannot replace use of water to clean your environment or care of taking care of the environment, getting rid of receptacles of water in the environment, and clearing the environment of decaying and dead tissues. Antibiotics is not going to replace the fact that you have to clean your environment so as to avoid fungal diseases of fungal origin. So the disease is incurable by human power. And one of the reasons is the effect it had on the system. It was leading to a multi-system collapse. Now let's hear what Desire of Ages, page 266 says. The leprosy was cleansed, and thus it was with the leprosy of sin, deep-rooted, deadly, impossible to be cleansed by human power. Okay? So the whole head is sick. This is a description we get from Isaiah chapter 1, verse 5 and 6 that perfectly describes a leprous disease. The whole head is sick, the whole heart faint, from the sole of the foot even unto the head, there is no soundness in it, but wounds and bruises and putrefied sores. So this is a description of a person who is full of leprosy. So the disease affects all the systems of the body and causes multi-organ failure. Now the question is, which doctor or what treatment can address a system that has entirely collapsed? We don't have treatment for that in modern science. And therefore, we need divine healing. The same way, we don't have treatment for sin apart from the grace of Jesus Christ. Therefore, we need Christ to intervene to heal our leprosy. And that is why the spirit of prophecy reports that no person who ever asked Jesus to be cleansed of leprosy encountered a no answer, or there was no delay in responding to such a request. So Jesus healed them instantly. So he wanted to show that anybody who asked Jesus for cleansing or for forgiveness of their sins, such kind of prayer will be answered immediately. Now, so as to get the real picture we have in Africa concerning fungal infections, I want you to know that most of the infections purported to be affecting Africans, especially those south of Sahara, are infections that have to do with poor sanitation, poverty, malnutrition, and overcrowding. And then overdrugging, because if people come claiming to assist, and then instead of assisting people to have good sanitation, to have clean water, to be well nourished, and then you're providing drugs, then you're not addressing the cause. So you'll be poisoning people with drugs because they're not targeting the real cause of problems. So you've heard of diseases such as tuberculosis, non-healing ulcers, tetanus, diphtheria, pneumonia, meningitis. All these diseases, including cholera and dysentery and other diarrheal diseases, typhoid, and the rest, these are diseases that are claiming most lives south of Sahara in Africa. And these are diseases that have 4 common predisposing factors. And we can name those 4. Malnutrition is one of them. Number 2, we have poor sanitation. Number 3, we have overcrowding. And number 4, we have overdrugging or overmedication. Because the cause is not being addressed, but people are over-medicated, over-inoculated. Now, one thing that helps us to know that the multinationals, the donors, the big pharma, Bill Gates, they are not interested in addressing these diseases is because they are maintaining famine. And how are they maintaining famine? Because they have taken away land from Africans. You know, Africans used not to be overcrowded. They were living in spacious uh, farms. But when the colonialists came and then they left, they bequeathed the land to the black neo-colonialists. Africans were put into concentrated camps, okay? Conditions where they were overcrowded, there was poor sanitation, there was competition for amenities, such as for those that provide sanitary services. And therefore, what erupted was these diseases: tuberculosis, pneumonia, meningitis. These are the conditions that are causing so many Africans to die. So if the multinationals, the current governments were to offer solutions, then they are supposed to decongest the Africans from those concentration camps. Number two, they're also supposed to provide piped water. They are not interested. Number three, they're supposed to provide food. They are not providing food. They are only providing poisons, inoculations. And they have a way of explaining the diseases that come as a result of overmedication. That is, use of chemicals causing reactions to the body, infections of the skin, and other conditions. They attribute the diseases that come as a result of medication to viruses and autoimmune diseases. So they always have a way to escape explaining the diseases that come as a result of using the wrong approaches to address the issues of malnutrition, overcrowding, and poor sanitation. So these are the hard facts. What we call infectious diseases in Africa are diseases of poverty and malnutrition. And you'll be surprised that such conditions of malnutrition, waste, by the way, where people are overcrowded, the issue of waste management is always a problem. So to dispose waste becomes a problem. So we have a lot of decay, and this is where fungus grows. You go to the slums in Nairobi, Kawangware, Mukuru kwa Jenga, Kibera. You're going to find this poor sanitation and the atmosphere is smelly. Now, if you notice the atmosphere is smelly, that tells you there is growth of fungus, because the only infectious agent that smells is fungus. And where fungus is smelling, there is dead tissue. So this is what is causing diseases in areas where there's overcrowding, there's poor nutrition, there's poor sanitation, and you have overmedication. So we may not have emphasized on fungus, but you'll be surprised to know if this issue was addressed, we could have eliminated what we call infectious diseases in Africa. Now, this is a biology of a fungus. It starts as unicellular, but it can grow big into a plant and become multicellular. So it destroys a dead tissue by secreting enzymes to digest the substrate externally. And it depends on dead and decaying organic matter. The most important characteristic of a fungus is production of mycotoxins. These are fungal poisons or spores that can be inhaled and spread widely and cause lung diseases, cause skin diseases, and all sorts of conditions, because fungus can affect any system in the body. It is important to note that there was no fungus before sin. In Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, there's no fungus because fungus loves decay. And there was no decay before sin. There was no death before sin. Okay? So we are told in Genesis 1 verse 31 that God saw everything he had created and it was very good. So there was no decay. So where could fungus has or have arisen from? You know, God did not create fungus. Fungus was not present during the 6 days of creation. By default, fungus comes with the absence of life. In fact, the very first time fungus is implied is in Genesis 3 verse 19, where it says, in the sweat of thy face. Now, whenever you see somebody sweating, always remember there is dead tissue, biological tissue, that is being excreted. And sweat is smelly because it contains dead biological tissue. Now, if we do not maintain proper sanitation of the skin, we are going to develop fungal infections on the skin. Because once this waste is excreted, it lies on the surface of the skin and it becomes a very good catcher media and breeding ground for fungus. So we need to bathe daily. Okay, so fungus is implied with the sweat of the face. The other time fungus is implied, we are told that till thou return unto the ground, for out of it thou wast taken, and unto it thou shalt return. So the conversion of a dead body to dust is the work of a decomposer that we call a fungus. So we have intelligent, divine, intelligent ways that God has designed on elimination of waste, elimination of dead biological waste. It's by using a decomposer, which we call a fungus. If God did not have this cleaning mechanism, we could all be dead because of infections. Now, God has a way, after sin, of converting every dead and decayed biological matter into dust so that he can recycle the energy that was used by the organism when it was alive so that it can be converted back for use by other generations. Good. So we have what we call the carbon cycle. And the carbon cycle is a cycle of life because in this cycle, the most important factor is conversion of energy back to the environment once an organism has died. And the organisms or the biological agent that has been allocated this work is the fungus, because its work is decomposition, making sure that everything you've ever acquired from this planet is given back to the earth for further reproduction of life in the organisms that have been left to continue with life. So it's called the carbon cycle or the cycle of life. The last agent, the grand finale, is the conversion of dead tissue to go back to dust. So science gives us 5 kingdoms, and this is what we call the hierarchy of life, as you can see on your screen. And this kingdom contains 5 entities. Okay, we have the kingdom Animalia, the plants, the fungi, the protists, and the monera. So you can get from those kingdoms that all the organisms mentioned have life. Okay, so viruses are not included in these kingdoms because they are not deemed to have life. Now, as you look at the organism, their energy decreases downward the kingdoms. Okay, and the organisms you find in the kingdom Animalia, they are cleaner compared to the organisms or the microorganisms in the lower kingdoms. They are cleaner in terms of what they feed. Okay, so you're going to find the microorganisms feed on dead, decaying tissue. So they feed on dead matter. And you can look at their lifespan. their lifespan is shorter because they feed on dead matter. Now, one thing that can make human beings to have a shorter lifespan is to feed on dead matter. And how do we feed on dead matter? Anytime you feed on flesh, you're feeding on dead matter. There's no way you're going to eat flesh unless it is dead. And from this dead flesh is where fungus grows. By the way, you only need 8 hours after an animal dies for fungus to start growing. So if you're eating a meat product 1 day later or 2 days later, you're consuming fungus. And you know, fungus, they are stubborn living things because they also grow in refrigerators. So by preserving your meat in a refrigerator does not mean it doesn't have fungal growth. There is fungal growth at a microscopic level. You may not see, but it is there because fungus is the absence of life. It comes by default with the absence of life. So if you want to have a shorter lifespan like the microorganisms, please continue subsisting on dead and decaying matter because these microorganisms are the ones allocated the work of converting dead matter into dust and recycling the energy. So reading from the book Education, page 189.5, we are told that it is on diseased, lifeless organisms that fungus roots. So the food for fungus is diseased, lifeless organism. That is why when you have a dead tissue anywhere on your body, whether it's an ulcer that is not healing, or whether it's athlete's foot, or whether it's a diabetic ulcer, maybe you have diabetes and you have an ulcer that is not healing. What is delaying the healing of that ulcer is fungal growth, okay? And that is why it is smelly. That is why it has a yellow or green or white color because of growth of fungus. So fungus prefers diseased and lifeless organisms, okay? It also grows in cells that are dying. And I've warned you about not taking a bath daily because you are excreting dead biological tissue on your skin where fungus can grow. Now, in another book called Child Guidance, page 108, we are told fungi lurk in neglected corners. So we are told every form of uncleanliness tends to disease. Death producing germs abound in dark, neglected corners, in decaying refuse, in darkness, in mold and must. So no waste vegetables or heaps of fallen leaves should be allowed to remain near the house to decay and poison the air. Nothing unclean or decaying should be tolerated within the home. So please be warned. Do not put decaying matter around your house because fungus will grow and it will generate mycotoxins or fungal poisons which are going to spread in the air and cause colds and fevers and diseases, including pneumonia. Okay, so please be careful of maintaining cleanliness. Cleanliness in the compound, in the environment you're living, cleanliness of your body, cleanliness of all your surroundings, including the spare bedrooms. They need to be aerated, they need to be cleaned, they need to be well ventilated, and this is meant to avoid damp places where fungus lives. Okay? Fungus loves darkness. One of the plagues in Egypt was darkness. And during the 3 days there was darkness, you can be sure there was fungal growth. And there are infections that resulted from that. And people died. Okay, let's look at something else. From the book Review and Herald, we are told that dampness causes fungus and also causes fevers. Now, let's read this. Numerous shade trees cast off many leaves, which, if not immediately removed, decay and poison the atmosphere. Dwellings, if possible, should be built upon high and dry ground. If a house is built where water settles around it, remaining for a time and then drying away, a poisonous miasma rises, and fever, note fever, and ague is a fever, sore throat, those who complain of tonsils and tonsillitis and swelling of the tonsils, lung diseases such as pneumonia, tuberculosis, okay, and asthma, and fevers will be the result. So, did you ever imagine that your pneumonia and your asthma and your tuberculosis could be being caused by fungus? I think you never imagined that. It is because of the dampness in the atmosphere. It's because of the decay around your camp. It is because of those bedding that are not taken out for aeration. You have a pillow, you only wash the pillowcase. You never wash the pillow stuffing. And you're spending a third of your life in the bedroom. And you are constantly inhaling that pillow stuffing overnight. You also have clothes on the line in the bedroom and they have gathered dust and you have not taken them out for aeration. Okay? So that is the spare bedroom that could be killing the visitors. And it's also your bedroom that could be causing your asthma and your pneumonia and your tuberculosis. Okay? And some of these diseases are stubborn. And when they become severe, they take away your life. Okay? The sore throat, the many fevers people have. Okay? People want to go to the chemist. They even have the medications in their houses. You have paracetamol, you have Piriton, you have cough syrups. You think you're very intelligent, yet you're inhaling dirty air in your bedroom. There is dampness, there is dust, you continue to inhale. You have a pillow that is never washed, pillow stuffing that are not taken out for aeration, and you think you're intelligent by keeping a chemist or a pharmacy in your house. So you're just making the disease to be more stubborn. Eventually, you have a disease that cannot be cured by any medication. So please, let's consider that the respiratory system will be affected by most of these fungal poisons more than any other system. Why? Because the respiratory system is only a one-way system. That is, we only have an entry, but we do not have an exit. It's not like the digestive system where when food enters, it can go out of the anus. For the respiratory system, if dirt or toxins enter the respiratory system, they are going to be retained in your lungs because they have no way out. And that is why we have one of the serious diseases humanity have ever suffered and have ever caused epidemics. They are diseases of respiratory origin. So look at any disease you've ever had. It has caused the deaths of many people in the past and present. It had to do with a respiratory condition because for one, the disease is inhaled, through your nostrils, and then it does not have a way out. It does not have a way out because we do not have an exit. And because we do not have an exit, we continue to suffer from respiratory illnesses. So most of the fungal toxins have their way in through the nostrils, and then they do not have a way out. So they continue to cause damage, and later they can seep into the bloodstream. Eventually, they cause diseases that affect the entire body. Now, we have evidence from the Review and Heralds of January 2, 1872 that fungus has ever resulted in deaths. So we are told. So they occupy the room and bed and contracted colds, from the effects of which one has since died and the other one still suffers. And then the last line we are told, if friends will not persist in putting me away in their chilly spare rooms, okay, and those damp beds. So by putting visitors in the spare rooms where the bedding has not been aerated and the clothes have not been sunbathed, so they contract colds. Imagine to the extent that these colds resulted in death and long suffering. That is a disease of long continuance. So whoever thought that a cold could have led to a serious pulmonary disease that would later claim the life of a visitor? And this is true. Many visitors are dying in those spare rooms they are given to spend the night because they inhale mold or fungal toxins. So now look at this. If we read from Kellogg's Handbook of Hygiene, we are told that when such cases have run their course, now we are reading from the book Review and Heralds. You can get the citation down there. That when such cases, that is those people who have been prescribed rooms, the spare beds for visitors, when such cases have run their course, that is when those visitors have contracted these colds and have a pulmonary disease, when they go to the doctor, they are diagnosed as to have hepatized lungs. Now, the other name for a hepatized lung is pneumonia. So when you go to the doctor, you are diagnosed as having pneumonia. That is a hepatized lung. But imagine it was a fungal disease. You contracted a cold from the fungal toxins, and then you got pneumonia. Today, mainstream science does not say that pneumonia comes from a fungus. But the reality of the matter is, because of inhalation of these fungal toxins from the dampness, from the dust, from the mold, in those spare beds, visitors have contracted these fungal toxins and developed pneumonia and maybe tuberculosis. And so we are told that the motives of good people cannot be questioned. So we have people who are generous, who assigned the visitors these rooms, but they were killing with kindness. So in the name of brotherhood, I protest if we are to occupy the spare rooms or sleep in the spare bed. So they should be dry and well aired. So before you prescribe a spare bed to any visitor, ensure it is clean, it's well aerated, it is well sunbathed, because we are killing visitors in the name of courtesy. We are providing death for a bedfellow to our visitors. Okay. Now, concerning fevers and colds, we are told if fever, that is from the book Review and Heralds, if fever enters a family, often more than once, the same disease affects another member. And this need not be the case if the habits of the family are correct. If their diet is as it should observe the habits of cleanliness and realize the necessity of ventilation, the fever need not extend to another member. So it is not always usual that whenever one family member gets a cold, the other members have to contract it. No, colds are not contagious. The theory about contagion of colds is brought by evolution, okay? Colds are not contagious. They are not. Because if the environment within which the family is living was clean, no one could contract a cold. So we are supposed to ensure cleanliness and also dryness so that no one contracts a cold. Okay? And remember that the cold can worsen and become a pulmonary disease and this should not be allowed. Okay. We also know that colds are not of viral origin. They come as a result of toxins that affect your throat and sometimes affect all the way to the lungs. And these are mostly fungal toxins. They are the ones that cause irritation of your throat and your lungs. Okay. And sometimes they are seasonal because of the condition of the environment. So it has nothing to do with transmission. It has to do with the environment uh, where the family is living. Now, a very important question here. So, do you think TB is largely caused by fungal or bacterial causes? And we've read that historically TB was also called consumption or leprosy. So the cause was of fungal origin. But today science has said it's a bacterial disease. But this is meant to shift focus on leprosy. If people understand leprosy, they will understand sin and they will also understand Satan. Now let's hear what Review and Herald is saying about TB or tuberculosis or consumption. Now, especially in wet seasons, the sleeping rooms become damp. Please note, the sleeping rooms become damp, and those who occupy them are troubled with one rheumatism. So whoever thought that rheumatoid arthritis could be of fungal origin? Neuralgia, problems to do with nerve diseases, and lung complaints, problems to do with lung infections, have a lot to do with the environment we are living in, whether it's damp, whether it is uh, dusty, and whether it has fungal toxins. So, and lastly, these diseases will end in consumption. Now, the grand finale of these diseases is tuberculosis. And it's coming all the way from dampness where fungus grows and mold. So if you ever thought tuberculosis was of bacterial origin, it is not. It's of fungal origin. In fact, mainstream science knows because the bacterium associated with tuberculosis is called mycobacterium. So myco stands for fungus. Okay, they have an understanding that the fungus, the causative agent, is of fungal origin. So we have discussed a very important topic on leprosy, and we've discovered why this disease is not mentioned as it is. There is no emphasis about it because it is a symbol of sin. But we have so many diseases today which are masked as leprosy, but they are named otherwise. We have ulcers that need to be called leprosy, but they are called diabetic ulcers. We have pulmonary diseases that are supposed to be called leprosy, but they are called pneumonia or tuberculosis. We have diseases of the joints that are supposed to be called leprosy, but they are called rheumatoid arthritis. We have diseases of the eyes. Anyway, leprosy affects all the systems of the body from the foot to the head. But because the devil knows understanding leprosy and keeping mentioning it is going to unmask him, unmask sin, and unmask his face and the mechanism he uses to kill his subjects. So the disease is not mentioned by its name. Its name has been changed to Hansen's disease. And the reason is the mastermind behind that is the devil. So let's be careful of fungal infections. That is what was called leprosy in the olden or Bible times. And we have so many of those conditions. The best way we can do is to follow the natural remedies that we shall be describing in a later video, how to eradicate fungal diseases because they are the major causes of epidemics, and in future, as we have read, we are likely to have a fungal apocalypse, and we need to be prepared to avoid it. So in the next video, we'll be looking at the natural remedies of leprosy or fungal infections. Goodbye and have a nice time till we meet again. Continue to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.